In Plato's dialogue Phaedo, he tells the story of Socrates after being sentenced to death, awaiting his execution, and arguing with his students about whether or not the soul survives death. They go back and forth with a series of arguments, and they reach a point at which the discussion leads some of them to throw up their hands in the apparent futility of philosophical reasoning. One of the students says, "When we heard the last argument, we were all depressed. Although we had been so firmly convinced by Socrates before, now to have our faith shaken seemed to introduce confusion and uncertainty, not only about the argument beforehand, but about any future one. We feel as though we are incapable of forming a judgment." Another philosopher says, "I was beginning to ask myself the same question. What argument can I ever trust again? For what could be more convincing than the argument of Socrates, which has now been refuted?" In response to this, Socrates warns, there is a certain experience we must be careful to avoid. We should not become misologues, that is, haters of dialogue, as people become misanthropes, haters of mankind. There is no greater evil one can suffer than to hate reasonable discourse. Misology and misanthropy arise in the same way. Misanthropy comes when a man without knowledge or skill has placed great trust in someone and believes him to be altogether truthful, sound, and reliable. Then, a short time afterwards, he finds the man to be wicked and unreliable. And then this happens again with somebody else. When one has frequently had this experience, especially with those whom one believed to be one's closest friends, then, in the end, after many such blows, one comes to hate all men and to believe that no one is sound in any way at all. Have you not seen this happen? Isn't it an ugly thing? And isn't it clear that such a man was setting about handling human beings without any skill in human relations? Because if he handled them with skill, he'd surely have recognized the truth, that extremely good and extremely bad people are both very few in number, and that the majority lie in between. It's the same with the very tall and the very short. Do you think anything is more rare than to find an extremely tall or an extremely short man, or dog, or anything else? Or again, one extremely fast or extremely slow, ugly or beautiful, pale or dark? Are you not aware that in all those cases, the most extreme at either end are rare and few, but those in between are many and common? The similarity in this with arguments is when someone who lacks skill in dialectics trusts some argument to be true, and then a little later, it seems to him to be false. Sometimes when it is false, and sometimes when it isn't. And then the same thing happens with another argument, and so on. This is especially true regarding those who spend their time studying contradiction. At the end of their study, they believe themselves to have become the wisest of mankind, for they alone, they think, perceive the utter unsoundness and instability of all arguments, or indeed of all things, which, like the currents in a violent and variable river, are going up and down in a never-ending ebb and flow. How pitiable a fate it would be, my friends, if there be such a thing as truth, or certainty, or possibility of knowledge, that a man should have lighted upon some argument or other which at first seemed true, and then turned out to be false, instead of blaming himself and his own lack of skill, because of his distress or his annoyance, should at last be too glad to transfer blame from himself to arguments in general, and spend the rest of his life hating and reviling reasonable discussion, and so be deprived of truth and of knowledge of reality. This, then, is the first thing we should guard against. We should not admit into our soul the thought that argumentation has nothing sound about it. Rather, we should believe that it is we who are not yet sound, and that we must take courage and be eager to attain soundness. You and the others for the sake of your whole life still to come, and I myself in the prospect of death.